Now, substance addiction in our society, is another major problem. As a matter of fact, we're talking about major problems. I think the key part of addiction is that we're taught something. We're taught something from day one. We're taught that happiness is going to come from outside of ourselves. We're taught that there's something there that's going to make me happy, that's going to make my life complete. And it's always going to come from outside me. It's going to be a new house, a new car. Usually it's a relationship or something that I can use to make sure I have a relationship, like I'm going to use the right shampoo so I don't scratch my head in public, and then people will like me and someone will come up and give me this wet kiss on the street if I use the right toothpaste. I mean, who wants it, first of all? And sometimes I do that because I'm thinking, not because I have an itchy scalp. But the fact is that we got to watch what we do because that person is around, and if we're not wearing the right clothes, using the right words, and the right products, we're going to miss our relationship and we're going to be miserable, and that's ridiculous. Happiness never comes from outside. Happiness comes from inside. It's like healthy, happy people have healthy, happy relationships. People that are miserable have miserable relationships. And so if inside is misery, dysfunction, then that's the kind of relationships that we end up with. And the other part though is, that's our Western philosophy in some ways. And I know, Eastern, you go inside more, it's more like connecting to self, meditation, looking inward, and we tend to look more outward for our happiness. I think you can go excess either direction. You can also go excess with meditation and going inward. So you can go excess with anything. Substance addiction, alcohol, drugs, primary addiction in our society. Leading cause of death in our country is probably alcohol and drug addiction. It doesn't get listed that, but that's because most deaths from alcohol and drugs don't get put down as death from alcohol and drugs. It's like cirrhosis of the liver, heart disease, bridge abutment, suicide, gets down as something else. No doubt that it's the biggest killing disease, and its impact on families and industry and crime and everything else is incredible. Eating disorders, substance addiction, food. Now there are people that are into eating like as more of an activity. Call those nervous eaters. Some people just start getting anxieties at about 7 p.m. and they start eating, and they kind of eat for the rest of the evening. It's not so much you're addicted to food, it's just that nervous habit of eating. It's more like smoking, it's like, it's a nervous habit in some ways. It's an anxiety disorder more. But a lot of us are addicted to food. And sometimes it's certain kinds of food. Like I belong to Banana Cream Pie Anonymous, and it's a bigger group than and to me Banana Cream Pie is euphoria. To someone else it's it's any kind of food. To someone else it's chocolate. Someone else it's maybe a sugar, any kind of sugar food, pastries, whatever. But we do get addicted to food. In our society, 50% of women and 60% of women and 50% of men are overweight. Now, I have this theory. It's a brand new theory, but I believe that most people are overweight because they overeat. Is that incredibly insightful? So the fact is that I think then that most Americans tend to overeat. Now, we overeat. I don't think it's by choice. I think it's a compulsive, addictive behavior. So we're looking at half our country possibly being addicted to food and using food to avoid their feeling reality. Using food to take care of loneliness, pain, anger, whatever it is, digging our graves with our teeth. But the reality is that food addiction is a common addiction. And I've experienced it in my life, and I've never considered it a major problem until I really started looking at, if I do overeat, how I relate to others. But I know I overeat, and I go up and down a little bit. That's the other thing to watch. You got to watch people that tell you how to lose weight, and they say, listen, I've lost thousands of pounds. They haven't lost thousands of pounds. They've lost the same 10, 20, 40 pounds over and over again. And that's the whole thing about treatment of addiction in our society. How do we treat addiction in our society? We look at the behavior. We treat the behavior. That's the symptom. That's not the problem. The behavior is just, it's like, if you got an eating disorder, and that is compulsive overeating, what do you do? What do you do for that? You go on a diet. What percent of diets work? Pardon?
3%.
Yeah, somewhere around 2 or 3% of all diets have a lasting impact on a person's life of any sort. It makes a change. So if only 3% of this is working, there's something wrong. It's because we're just dealing with the behavior. We're not dealing with the system. We're not dealing with the feelings when we go on a diet. And so we're just kind of controlling it for a while. And we know that controlled, we don't tell alcoholics to do that. Most of us are aware that, we'll go on an alcohol diet. Just cut down your alcohol intake, or don't drink alcohol for a little while, and then you'll be okay. And that doesn't work. They have to work a program that deals with the control issues and the feelings and the system that they're in. They have to go through a recovery process. So I think we're really kind of mixed up. Like, we know about alcoholism, but that's the only one that we seem to apply it for, when we're really dealing with addiction. Substance addiction. Any others? Well, there's nicotine, caffeine, sugar. I guess you get into salt and a lot of other substances. I'm going to make a confession now. Pardon?
Carrots can do that too.
Carrots?
Carotene.
Mm-hmm. Grow long ears and say, "What's up, Doc?" a lot. Is that okay? Carrots. Okay, carrots can be that way. Carotene can be addictive as well. That's one I didn't realize. All right, now, I think that. Well, I was going to make a confession, wasn't I? See, notice how soon they forget. All right, I'm an addict. I'm going to tell you one of my addictions. I'm a junk junkie. Okay, I collect junk. See, this whole category of substances, I'm addicted to things. Now, I think I came by my addiction fairly honestly. When I was growing up, my dad would get real angry and rageful, and sometimes violent, and sometimes drunk, and sometimes all that together. And we would feel horrible. All of us in the family felt bad. And he would feel bad too. So he figured that he could make us feel better if he bought us something. Imagine that. Like somehow buying us something is going to make us feel good. It worked every time. I always felt better when he bought me something. It was great. And so, of course, now I leave the family. I'm no longer in that system. And I start to feel bad. What am I going to do? I'm going to go out and buy something and feel better. Of course, I used to teach. See, I taught back in the early 60s. And back in the early 60s, when you taught, you had to pay the school district that you were teaching for teaching there. Your what check you got was like a negative balance. They showed you how much you owed the district for working there. And that was how bad the pay was. So, of course, I had to discover garage sales. And I discovered a garage sale, and I discovered the theory of garage sales. Quality has nothing to do with it. It's quantity and cheap. And Nirvana's big boxes of free stuff that you can take home and sort through, right? So, I buy motorcycles, mechanical stuff. Well, people don't sell mechanical stuff at garage sales that run. Why would you sell it if it's running? At least I never would, because I could never get anything running. So I'd have all this stuff in my house, and I filled my house with it, and then I built a bigger house. I did. And I built a house with a huge garage, and a loft above the garage, a storage loft above this huge garage. And last year, and this is Minnesota, mind you, I couldn't get a car in my garage. It was so full of junk. And the loft, you couldn't walk through. It was so full of junk. And I'd worry about my junk, and I'd worry about getting things running. And I didn't, and some of you maybe know this already, but I didn't. I wasn't owning the stuff that I owned. It was owning me. But it was my addiction, and I could worry about it. So I had a garage sale. And it was the junk, of course, that I sold. And it was great. I discovered pushing. You can be a pusher. You get... And if you're going to be in the addiction field, I understand the big pull about pushing. You get money. Now, I have to also confess that a couple weeks later, I took all that money and had a major slip. I bought a whole bunch of junk. But you can never buy as much as you sell with the same amount of money, right? I always, buy high, sell low. That's my theory of investment. And that way, though, I keep having garage sales. Eventually, I'm going to have very little junk in the house. It's going to work. It's not recovery, but it's effective anyway. So, that was my belief, that stuff, and it would make me happy. It would work. It was a fix. I could get the rush. In fact, I would get the rush. You ever see people jogging to an estate sale, running from their car to the estate sale? The thing's been going on for 2 days, but that 2 minutes is going to make a difference because there's something there that you really don't need, but you're going to love to own. Well, let's go on to another. Well, before we go, there are some others. People get addicted to procrastinating, but we'll talk about that one later. Let's see. People get addicted to pets. And that one could go into the people one, But some, you know, and I don't know where it goes because they're not quite people, but we treat them as people sometimes. I work with someone that talked about, well, first of all, she could only work on the phone. She couldn't leave the house, or for more than 20 minutes at a time. She had 97 cats, and she'd been living that way for about 12 years. See, in her, you know, I mean, that was her obsession, those cats, and they controlled her life. Of course, people never get addicted to dogs. We know that, and especially sled dogs, so we won't talk about that. People addiction. A lot of different kinds of people addiction. You know, Stanton Peele, the guy that wrote Love and Addiction, you know, he sort of broke the ice with that concept that we get addicted to relationships, we get addicted to being in love, we get addicted to other people. Of course, you know, he did all his research in the National Enquirer. And I love how he, I mean, he did. And he knows all the stars, and he knows all the relationships that they've had. You know, and he'll talk about one star, you know, who recently, you know, was in the paper and said he's just fallen in love. You know, he's only like, I think he's only 98 or something like that. And he just fallen in love with his 14-year-old starlet or something like that. That's an exaggeration. Really, only 60 and 14 or 16. But anyway, all he wants to do is be with her. He talks about he wants to give up his career, move to a desert island, and just worship her and be with her all of the time. Okay, and 2 weeks later, their divorce is announced. And a week later, he's in love with someone else. And all he wants to do, it's the love of his life, you know, and he wants to go to a desert island. And, you know, I mean, this guy isn't into relationship at all. Just addicted to being in love. To the romance, the euphoria, the rush, the glandular feelings, whatever it is that comes with falling in love. You know, that can be very highly addictive, and it's very euphoric, and it's very distracting. But it does wear off, you know, that immediate rush, especially when it's not about relationship or intimacy. People get addicted to their kids, too. I was doing a workshop in Texas, and there was a person sitting sort of on my left, and I can kind of see her now, and she was agitating and getting real nervous and worried, and I finally, you know, it was like 9 o'clock at night, 9:30, and I finally said, you know, what's happening, you know, and she said, well, I'm really worried about my son. He's going to come home, and the house is going to be dark, and there's no food prepared for him, you know, and I don't know what he's going to do or how he's going to react, and I'm really concerned about him. Well, I started getting concerned too, and I thought, well, we can call neighbors, maybe call the police. You know, she could, you know, run over there, but it was kind of far, so she wouldn't get there very quickly. So finally, I just had to ask, well, how old is he? Oh, he's 33. He was managing a bank at the time. And so I assumed that, you know, if he was managing a bank, he could probably switch the lights on, maybe even eat. But then I know someone was in the audience that worked in a bank and said that wasn't necessarily true, and that maybe she should run home. So in the bank that I bank at, I know it isn't true, so I definitely have had her go home if you worked for that bank. But, you know, it's like, well, a friend of mine talks about the most common operation needed in our society. He says it's a parentectomy. He says the kids have to surgically be removed from the parents. And it's not just that we use our kids to obsess and worry and distract ourselves from our reality and our marriage and our relationships, but we set them up to get so bonded and addicted to us that they can't go and live their own lives. And I'm going to talk about that, you know, some more. But, you know, that whole addiction bonding between parents and children is a key issue in anybody's recovery if it's happened to us, or if it happened within the family, whether it happened directly to us or not. And I think it happens in most families. We have there's a whole concept of just that we have to be in relationship, you know, and that we're not a whole person in our society. I mean, single people go through the pits because, because they're not whole. There's something wrong with them if they're not in a relationship. You can be single, but you still have to be in a relationship, or you have to have a bunch of on the string. And just to be, living alone and not in relationship and not overly concerned about it right now, means you're weird in our society. It's about relationship. And I think we have a lot of half people. See, and a lot of these half people are looking for another half person, so together they can be a whole person. And I was talking to John Bradshaw, and he says, in math I learned that when you multiply 1/2 times 1/2, you don't get a whole. You get a quarter. So what you have when you get two half people together is you get less than they had when they were separate. You bring the other person down with you. You go further into whatever it is that you're missing. It doesn't work. No one else can round you out. You got to do that before you can have relationship. And that thing that we call addiction to destructive relationships, we have a term called codependency. And the term is bounding about all over the country now, I guess. I hear it started in Minnesota, but that's a little bit wrong. In Minnesota, we call it cold dependency, and the whole thing has been a mistake. See, and cold dependency is something that we really suffer from in Minnesota. That's why we can't leave. We get dependent on the cold. But now other people have heard, and they made it codependency, and they think it's about relationships. So, and also now I know how California feels like when they have the California flu virus or something like that. There's so much shame attached to it. Now we have the Minnesota codependency model. Well, and I guess codependency was invented in Minnesota because we invented alcoholism there, and we have the Hazelden Foundation and the Johnson Institute and Parkview, and we have all this, all these people that are, doing all this stuff with alcoholism. So, of course, we had to discover codependency. And where we discovered it was in the alcoholic family and the alcoholic spouse. In fact, that's where the name came from. What we found out was the spouse seemed to get the same disease as the alcoholic. And like they were in denial, and they were projecting, and they were minimizing, and they were sick, and they were acting out compulsively, and a lot of times they tried excessive drinking or pills or, and got into phobias and all this other stuff. So we said, oh, they must be like chemically dependent, they must be dependent too, so we called it codependent. Now, we used to think then that this codependency came about if you lived with an alcoholic long enough, you started getting sick. Mistake. Codependency, well, if you're codependent, you live with alcoholics or people that you can always react to and revolve around. You don't get codependency while you're with the alcoholic. You're with the alcoholic because you got codependency. Now, codependency is a tough concept. Any of you have been in treatment for it or looking at it as an issue in your life, it's real nebulous. You ever notice that some days you think you got a grasp on it, and 5 minutes later, what the hell is codependency? And someone else is describing it, it doesn't mean anything to you. And then you'll hear one thing that'll kind of click, and then you got to grasp on it again. It's real nebulous. It's a real hard thing to grab onto. I think part of that is because it means so much and so many different things. Primarily, what I see it being is that we become overreactive to other people and less reactive to who we are. That we don't act out of our needs, our feelings, our wants, our roles. We react to other people's needs, feelings, wants, roles, responsibilities. Codependency is like most addictions, it's about survival. And that, like, I'm very codependent, and I know how I learned my codependency. When I was growing up, if you grow up in an alcoholic, violent family, you learn to be codependent or you're in big trouble. So I could start to read the temperature, of what's going on in the system immediately. I think within 100 yards of the house I could start to tell how I should start reacting. Now, should I come in very happy, clowning around, messing around, making people, relieving the tension? Or should I not come in at all? Or should I confront things? Or should I go in and support my mom because she's about ready to kill herself? Or leave, and I didn't want her to leave? Or should I maybe not have a friend home? Or should I have a friend? And it all depends on where my mom is at with her depression and her anger and her pain, and my dad is at with his drinking and his rage and all this stuff. So I learned to react. Now, I do believe codependency is an addiction, and that we have to have a relationship with someone to always be reacting to, and in our being so reactive to them, we lose the perspective, we lose the value and the worth of a relationship, and we don't like it anymore. It becomes a destructive relationship. So we call it an addiction to destructive relationship. But I think codependents have an ability to make relationships destructive if they can't find one that starts out that way. Of course, the more often that we can find someone who is sick, that our life can really revolve around, that's a better kind of relationship for a codependent, someone that you can really react to, than someone that's so overtly in trouble, like with alcoholism, that you can be a caretaker. And codependents tend to feel like caretakers, or they get into being caretakers. They feel like martyrs. There's a lot of attempts at perfection. See, I think codependents generally have, like, developmentally, they don't feel like much integrity, wholeness about themselves. And the perfectionism that comes is an attempt to restore that wholeness, to repair the integrity. And to protect ourselves from other people seeing how broken we feel. So that's a lot of our codependency. I think codependents tend to generally get enmeshed in relationships. We lose our reality in the relationship, and maybe I can show that with my hands a little bit. It's like, we meet someone and we kind of start to, dissolve into that person. And then we're in this enmeshed relationship. See, and codependents don't know where they stop and other people begin. They don't have a sense of boundaries. And like which finger belongs to which hand, it's hard to tell anymore if I move them too fast, isn't it? And so, you start to get smothered, though, and like, eventually I say, oh, it'd be nice just to be out of this relationship, not have to worry about what movie she wants to see, not have to do this stuff. And so I want out of the relationship, and codependents do struggle with the relationship, and then, like, the struggle goes on, sometimes, forever, but sometimes we break out. Boy, it feels great. I don't have to worry about anybody but myself. If I want to go to a movie, I don't even have to ask anybody. I just go to a movie, no one to take care of but myself. It's so wonderful being alone, but boy, I sure need a cigarette. Or I think I need a drink. Or I'm sure gaining a lot of weight. Or I don't know if this is all as cracked back into an enmeshed relationship, see? And this is the line that codependents know, enmeshment and isolation. And neither one seems very healthy to me. We've got to learn a whole new line. And the new line is one that's called intimacy and detachment. Intimacy is something that a lot of us are searching for, like we want to make it like hot chocolate that you just add water, instant intimacy. So we meet someone the first date, let's have sex, and will you make me breakfast for the rest of my life? And that's going to be our intimacy, and that's going to be relationship and love. And we're always trying to, find it face to face. See, I think you can love people face to face. You share your reality with them, your feelings, and that's the act of love, sharing your reality with another person. That's important. But intimacy builds a little differently and a lot more gradually. Intimacy builds by two people facing the world side by side outside of themselves in the same direction. The other thing is that when you have intimacy, you cannot be with the person and you still have intimacy. See, intimacy, you're still facing the world in the same direction. You still have the backlog of shared experiences. But what happens, I don't know, addicts have a harder time with intimacy. See, when they get away, they get isolated. And a lot of people that, I don't know if you've ever traveled as part of your job, you get on the road, and if you're an addict, you tend to act out more, or it's a struggle. You want to drink more, have sex more, overeat, and people that travel do that. That's because they're enmeshed in the relationship, and they don't have the intimacy that allows for detachment and separation where you still have relationship. Detachment is an important concept. A lot of us need it in a lot of areas of our life. Detachment, though, see, intimacy and detachment doesn't mean you don't care, you don't love, you're not concerned about. It just means you're not enmeshed in the other person's reality. So that's some about codependency. Now, this relationship addiction, codependent. No, there's more about codependency, actually. There's a lot more. But we'll take some more time. I think that codependency can either be an addiction or a learned behavior. Now, as an addiction, we got to work a recovery program. And that has to be something that we're going to have to learn to live with in our life. You don't recover from codependency like you don't recover from alcoholism. You're always codependent. And the expectations that you give yourself of life, it's like you have this handicap. Your codependency, my codependency is a handicap. But you see, it's never been what we have that makes a difference. It's always been what we do with what we have that makes a difference. There's a lot of people with handicaps that have made a lot more out of their life than people that don't seem to have any handicaps. All right, so if codependency is a handicap, it doesn't have to limit my ability to have relationships and have health and fun and joy in my life. I just have to be aware of the kind of relationships I'm probably going to have. As a codependent, you're more likely to get in relationships with other codependents or addicts. And in fact, it's sort of like a friend of mine talks about how professional chess players never seem to hang around with professional Monopoly players. Why? Well, you hang around with professional chess players. If you hang around with Monopoly players, every time you sit down, this is a strange board. What are the rules of this game? Which way do the pieces go? What kind of language do we use here? So if you're an addict and a codependent, you'll probably be in relationships with addicts and codependents. And so you don't have to learn the rules of a new game and which way what the board looks like. But the thing is then that as you get healthier, you get in relationships with recovering addicts and codependents. Or if you don't, you respond more healthily to the active addicts and codependents that you're in relationship with. Is this making sense at all? Okay, good. So we have to recognize that there are some limitations, and that we might have a handicap. But if it's a learned behavior, all it means is that we were set up and taught to be codependent, and someone can teach us to not be codependent. The difference is if once you still keep doing it the old way, then you need a recovery program. Because I'm going to be living with this for the rest of my life. That's part of codependency. We get addicted to destructive relationships of certain kinds sometimes. We get addicted to battering relationships. Now, I'm a little reluctant to say that because there's the part of the battering is an addictive process. When someone gets battered and beaten, they become bonded to the abuser. There's an enslavement that goes with the battering itself. The battered person loses their power, loses their ability to make choices. And I worked with consulting with the Domestic Abuse Project, and we worked with women who were being battered, and we had about 30 of them who were currently being battered. And we gave them a list of what they wanted to have happen in their life. And do you know that not one of them said, "I want out of the relationship"? None of them. They wanted it to change from within. They didn't have the right to even consider leaving.